All right, if you're one of the many people that tried dating in 2024, you've probably realized that it sucks. And as a straight white male who is very interested in the opposite sex, I thought I'd investigate this phenomena and really come to a conclusion about, okay, why is dating so hard? So there are many factors that go into this, many socioeconomic implications that deal with attraction, all that other stuff. But what I wanted to focus on in particular was hypergamy. Now, hypergamy, what is it? Well, the word hypergamy actually comes from Greek. The prefix hyper means to be above, and gamy means marriage. Essentially, verbatim means to be above marriage. Now, hypergamy in the modern context simply means dating or marrying or pairing with somebody of a higher social status. If you think about 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, men were needed for provisioning and protecting. And so if a woman paired with a man who couldn't hunt, fish, find water, or build shelter, that essentially guaranteed death for her and her progeny. So selectivity is important. It's different in 2024. We still have the same wiring as we've always had, but now we have TikTok and Instagram. So I wanted to investigate why dating is hard and the role that hypergamy plays in mating today. So let's get into it. So according to Forbes.com, in Canada in 2021 and 2022, women made up nearly 60% of graduates across all disciplines, and they made up 55% of enrollment. So women are getting educated at higher rates. Wonderful. And in the United States, in 2021 and 2022, women earned a majority of their post-secondary degrees at every level. For example, women earned 58.5% of bachelor's degrees and 62.6% of master's degrees, 62.8% of associate's degrees, and 57% of doctoral degrees. I'd also like to consider the fact that single women own more homes than single men. So in 2023, single women in the United States owned about 10.76 million homes compared to 8.12 million for single men. So far, the data demonstrates that single women are educated at higher rates, own homes at a higher rate. Perhaps women of today are just simply better at making decisions. I think that just might be the case, but for the sake of being scientific, we're going to dig into this a little bit further. So my research led me to a paper called Genes, Legitimacy, and Hypergamy, another look at the economics of marriage by Gilles St. Paul. We'll refer to this gentleman as St. Paul going forward. This research paper delves into the economic model of marriage, emphasizes the biological and psychological differences between men and women. This study explores how these differences influence marriage markets, which is the marriage market, capital accumulation, which is making money, and the evolution of the gene pool. Now, something that I'll point out, we can conclude with high confidence that something that is true about everybody on the planet that is alive today is that our ancestors mated successfully, which is very interesting to consider. I think that's not an unprofound thing to say. I think that's kind of really cool to think about it that way, that we are the descendants of the people that, one, survived, and two, were competent enough to permeate their seed forward. And that's very interesting. So this study identifies two types of marriage markets: Victorian and Sex and the City. Now you can imagine Victorian marriage suggests more homogamous marriage, which can be described as a regulated dating or sexual marketplace. And Sex and the City can be associated with a hypergamous sexual marketplace. So the markets can shift from Victorian to Sex and the City with increasing inequality, resulting in a pool of unmarried men at the bottom and unmarried women at the top of the human capital distribution. We'll go into this a little bit later on. What that means for now is that the men at the bottom struggle finding partners, and the women at the top, who make a lot of money, also struggle finding partners, which isn't something that's talked about enough. And so that's why I'm here. Anyway, in 2024, I believe it's safe to say that we are most definitely in a Sex and the City hypergamous marketplace. So when did this shift happen, and why did it happen? We'll get into that. What happened in the 1960s? All right, that seems to be the pivotal era that shifted things around from the Victorian sexual marketplace to the Sex and the City sexual marketplace. So, in the 1960s, you had what is known as the sexual revolution, the popularization of hormonal birth control, and the feminist movement, which resulted in liberalized attitudes towards sex. Now, I'm not complaining, but you gotta really analyze it. When you have a globalized sexual marketplace and a liberalized sexual marketplace, unregulated sexual marketplace, hypergamy is going to run rampant. This could also explain why a third of men between the ages of 18 to 25 have reported having no sex in the past year. Very interesting. St. Paul goes on to say that in the state of nature, only the alpha men mate and the beta men are driven out of the marriage market as they cannot credibly buy legitimacy or commitment from women. Now, legitimacy essentially means that you're able to ensure that the kids that that woman is going to bring forth are yours. Because prior to the 1960s, there were no paternity tests, at least not mainstream paternity tests. So the idea of Victorian sexual marketplaces was also a tool to ensure that the kids belonged to the particular man in question. And so the beta men are going to get driven out of the sexual marketplace because they can't buy that legitimacy, they can't buy commitment, because if there is a better option than you, of course they're going to take it. It's human nature, it's economics. As such, the men at the top of the socio-sexual hierarchy have unfettered access to nearly all of the mating options. The ethical implications of this are quite significant, as they suggest that policies aimed at altering sexual behavior, such as the liberalization of sexuality, can have far-reaching effects on birth rates, social structure, and human capital development. You can understand why men are so obsessed with chasing status symbols like cars and houses and gold and Bitcoin and all that stuff, because the men that accumulate capital are more likely to project their seed forward into future generations, whereas the men who are not get left behind. And so, survival of the fittest, I suppose. St. Paul's research also looks at marriage rates by income groups. This graph shows that on the lower end, women are more likely than men to get married. And on the higher end, men are more likely than women to get married. So this actually demonstrates that a woman's status is irrelevant when it comes to marriage. So it just goes to show you that women can be of lower status and still marry upward, right? It doesn't happen all the time, but it's more likely than not for women than it is men. This makes sense, as I said, because as a man's income goes up, so does his ability to purchase legitimacy. Conversely, as a woman's income goes up, she's less likely to be married. This, I think, is because of the fact that the pool of men who earn more than her, are taller, stronger, more charismatic, more competent, are so few and far between. St. Paul also discovers that in a Sex and the City marketplace, men are less likely overall to initiate divorce, regardless of income, whereas women are far more likely to initiate divorce when she makes more money. In my research process, I actually stumbled upon a man by the name of James Sexton. James Sexton, he's a famous divorce lawyer. His work is all over TikTok. So through his practice, he actually found that a major precipitator of divorce was when women suddenly became the breadwinner of the family. Play the clip.
I see a tremendous number of divorces when husband and wife are both working and husband loses job. Big precipitator for divorce, because men, it sends them spiraling into a depression that they've lost this job, that much of how they define themselves in sort of the traditional masculine gender role is that of a provider and a protector, and now I've failed at that. And at the same time, my spouse has managed to keep their job. And I've seen a lot of women that when their spouse loses the job and they become the breadwinner, they find that very unappealing. I would love if they kept statistics on these kinds of things, but I can tell you in my practice, I've seen plenty of women lose their job. It has no impact on the marriage. Men lose their job in a heterosexual male-female marriage. It is disastrous consequences a great deal of the time.
So now in 2024, you have a situation where women overall are increasing in their status of being educated at higher rates. They're making financially smart decisions at higher rates, achieving financial stability at higher rates than men. And men overall are decreasing in status comparatively. There are more men that have gone without sex in a single year than ever before. Because of hypergamy, women of high status are less likely to find a suitable mate. So much so that Morgan Stanley conducted a study where they conclude that 45% of women between the ages of 25 and 44 are projected to be single and childless by 2030. These aren't my words. This is Morgan Stanley. So, invest in cat food, I suppose. So, back to the original question that led me to this research. Why is dating so hard in 2024? From the data presented by St. Paul and James Sexton and Morgan Stanley, we can deduce the following. For women with lower status, marriage is easier because majority of eligible men in the market are of higher status than they are. For women of a higher status, marriage is harder because a majority of eligible men in the market are of lower status than they are. For a man of high status, marriage is easy, obviously. And for a man of low status, marriage is hard, obviously. So, we can conclude that dating is hard if you are a low status man and a high status woman. Dating is easy if you are a high status man and a low status woman. The truth of the matter is, hypergamy is here to stay. It is up to us, as men and women, to decide who we want to be, where we want to be, who we want to be with, and plan accordingly. I will say, society can't function without people. And so when you look at how birth rates are declining in the West, in Canada, the United States, the UK, Japan's pretty much a Western country at this point, you have to ask yourself, okay, this decline in birth rates, accept it's happening, but you have to ask yourself why this is happening. So the data presented by St. Paul actually paints a very interesting and succinct picture. If you follow Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. And as simple as it is, and as hard as it is to swallow, it makes sense why dating is hard. And it makes sense why a lot of men don't even try dating. And it makes sense why a lot of women don't even try dating anymore. And so we have to come to a consensus collectively. Who are we? What do we want? And what are we going to do about it? Because if there's no people, we're fucked. and that's putting it liberally. So yeah, that's what led me to this research. I found it very, very interesting, and I'm definitely going to dive in more on my own time. Yeah, later.